Welcome to Stoked with Megan McPhail, the podcast that helps you get super effing jazzed about your work, life, and bank account. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become a seven-figure business coach, entrepreneur, and elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on inspiring others to do the same. Are you ready to say goodbye to the 9-to-5 grind and start going after some big, bold dreams? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail, and today we have a very exciting episode specifically for the elopement photographers. We are currently in Mount Shasta, California, doing a bunch of location scouting for our elopement on June 12th. So this is going to publish after that. But I wanted to go through the process of location scouting because a lot of times it's really unknown for new elopement photographers and they don't really know how to do it. And it's a really important part of our process so that our couples can kind of relax and not have to worry about all this location business on their own and know that, we're basically going to take them through a very memorable, adventurous, amazing day, and they're not going to have to worry about how we figured out the locations and how it unfolds and the logistics of everything. So what is location scouting? Let's talk about that first, because for me, I really focus on location scouting in locations I've never photographed before. So, most of the time we get booked for places we've already been to before, right?
More often than not, yes.
Yeah, so we often shoot in the same locations over and over again, so we don't have to do a ton of location scouting for like Zion and Telluride and places where we know like the back of our hand. But if you are a new elopement photographer who is not familiar with planning elopements, or if you're an elopement photographer and you're about to shoot someplace you've never photographed before, then all of this stuff is really, really important. And how you talk about it with your couples is also really important. So the purpose of location scouting is finding the perfect location for the ceremony, for an adventure, for hiking, for secondary locations, just basically creating the most epic day for your couple and like what that's going to look like. So we often show up to our locations many days ahead of time so that we can finish up the location scouting process, because if it's a place we've never shot before, we'll do a lot of research ahead of time. I often use All Trails, Facebook groups, friends, Instagram, Google Maps, Google Earth. And a lot of times I even Google things like most Instagrammable spots in XYZ location, because a lot of people have done kind of the work for us to find the most photographable locations that people want to go to. So if I haven't been to a place before, kind of like Mount Shasta, I've been here before back in 2019, but this is a longer elopement that involves more things that I didn't get to scout before. So I knew my couple wanted to have their ceremony on Lake Siskiyou, so we had to find a place for that. I knew they wanted to incorporate a waterfall, and there's a bunch of waterfalls here, so we had to incorporate that. And then they also wanted to incorporate some kind of hike with epic views of Mount Shasta, so we also have to figure that out. So for me to start the location scouting process, I basically started researching online.
And some of that early work is done when we're actually talking with our couples and like planning out what their day looks like. So during that like consult call or in follow-up calls, we'll like bring up different photos or different maps or trails like in the middle of that call and like kind of gauge the interest or like how excited the couple is for the different kind of options. And so doing that front end work on the computer then allows us to be like really, really prepared so we can use our time as best we can when we're out on location on the days following up to the elopement.
Yeah, that's perfect explanation of how we do it. So yeah, a lot of times our initial research on the location is really trying to mostly figure out what our couples want and really getting to know our couples. So sometimes it can be hard to explain the location scouting process when it's just kind of like a vague, well, how do I do it? Because so much of it is dependent on what your couples want and what they're expecting and kind of like the process of talking with them about it. So I'm actually going to link in the show notes my questionnaire that I use for this after they book me because it's really key. And I have it as a freebie where you can sign up and get it for free. So anybody who doesn't have a good questionnaire or like a good line of questioning to understand your couples and what they want for their elopement day and out of the location scouting process, you should definitely grab that. So a lot of it takes place kind of talking with them, figuring things out, showing them photos. Do they need a bathroom? Do they need parking? Do they need something dog friendly? Are grandparents going to be there? Because a lot of our elopements do involve some family members. So understanding what they want out of these locations as far as those go, plus privacy. Do they want lakes? Do they want hikes? How long do they want to hike? What kind of elevation do they want to hike? Do they not want to hike? Do they want to drive to places? Those are all really important conversations. So we start the researching process just using anything at my fingertips. I mainly use Google Maps and AllTrails. AllTrails is key. I feel like AllTrails, it's a great app that like shows you hikes and stuff like that and the distance and photos and all kinds of things. So really the most important thing is to get your boots on the ground. Because before you actually visit these places, like we've done elopements in Hawaii, I've done them in Washington and Oregon, just like places we've never been before. And I can do all the online research under the sun, but until I actually get to that place, I don't know what I'm talking about. So what I tell my couples is I get a good idea of what they want. I present them with options. I get their feedback. And then I basically tell them, like, I'm not going to have all the final details of your timeline and the locations until I do my on-site visits, till I get my boots on the ground. And that's typically just a few days before their elopement day. So you really have to communicate that with your couples and say, like, hey, like, I have a plan in my mind and on a Google Doc. There is a plan, but it's not really going to be finalized until we get out there and scout everything out for ourselves and see everything for ourselves. Because I'm not going to take a couple who's paid us, what, 8, 9, 10, 11, $12,000. I'm not going to take them on this elopement adventure for a whole day without basically doing like a dry run. So, for example, here in Mount Shasta, I have been here before. I'm familiar with things, but like adding a waterfall to the day is something super exciting and is going to be great. But like I haven't been to any of these waterfalls. So yesterday we went to a bunch of different waterfalls to see which ones were the most accessible, which ones were the most private, which ones were the most epic, all that kind of stuff. And we found one that really suits our couple's needs really well. So we spent a whole day just looking for waterfalls. And then today we spent a whole day just searching for ceremony locations along Lake Siskiyou because there's a ton of different spots that we could do that. We wanted to make sure that we had parking available because there are some family members coming. We wanted to make sure we had a bathroom available because moms and grandmas always want bathrooms. We wanted to make sure that the ground was even and easily accessible, but that there are also cool views. So we found that location. And then tomorrow we're going to finish up our location scouting by doing a hike that right now we're not sure if it's going to be accessible for us, at least for our couple who are going to be in wedding attire because there's still some snow up there. So we're going to have to do that whole hike ahead of time so that we don't come across any unknowns or surprises, right?
Yeah, and what we've learned over the years of doing this is even if it's a location that we've shot at hundreds of times, we still check things out. We still do the hikes, still do the drives, because we found that more than once, like trails get closed or they're doing maintenance or there's a detour, whatever it may be. It's not just a slam dunk. Just because you've been there before doesn't mean it's going to go as smoothly as you expect it to. And we're portraying ourselves as the experts, and like we've gained that trust from our couples. And so like we don't want to look like fools and like stress us out, stress them out by some kind of, wild card popping up on the day if we could prevent it. Like
Totally.
Sure, things like may come up on the day, but like we want to make sure we have all of our eggs in the basket for success before we show up and start the day with the couple.
Absolutely, yeah. And like especially in June in high altitude places. We have run across snowpacks and closed trails and closed roads, all kinds of things in June. So we basically, not only do we want to figure out which specific locations we're going to be going to this Wednesday, but then also the status of those locations. Like, even if we had picked them out ahead of time and weren't trying to narrow things down the days before the elopement, like, we would still drive to these places, hike to these places, because we're concerned about snow melt, we're concerned about trail closures, we're concerned about bathroom closures, parking lot closures. We've encountered all of these things. You just never know what you might come across and need a backup plan. And so that's why it's also really important to not only scout the locations you're going to be shooting at, but also potential backup locations, so that you can, instead of stressing out your couple, basically say, hey, we can't access this spot, but I have a great spot that I'm going to take you to instead. And I don't want you to worry about it. I don't want you to stress about it. It'll be a surprise. It'll be fun. It'll be cool, that kind of stuff. So really understanding the location where you're shooting. I think a lot of photographers kind of, like, when they first start shooting elopements, especially if it's destination stuff, it might be just a few hours long and they might just fly in, shoot, and then fly right out. But the best thing that you can do is really understand these places, respect these places, and just visit as many parts of it as you can, and factor that into your travel plans so that you have enough time ahead of the elopement to visit all these places in person, as well as have some time to recover from location scouting and traveling, because that's really exhausting, especially as we're getting older.
Yeah. And
we have to like factor in rest time.
well, and even before our bodies started breaking down like they have the last couple of years, sometimes we do like big hikes at high elevation in Colorado or whatever, and go ahead and like do that hike the very next day.
Yeah.
So like figuring like having a scout day and then a recovery day before the elopement day is like,
It's huge.
It's huge. One, your body is going to thank you, but also like you'll have more energy. It won't be just like, oh, I just did this hike yesterday. So it will be like more exciting, and like you can bring better and like more energy for your couple.
Yeah. This is also why people pay us the big bucks, right? Because we aren't just swooping in, throwing together a half-ass timeline and logistics and throwing together locations. Like, we are truly getting to know our couples, and we're making sure that we're rested. We're making sure that we're hydrated. We're making sure that we cover all of our bases, that we find the best locations for them based on what they've told us that they need. And not only are we communicating that to them and doing our research ahead of time, but then we're also, we're spending 3 days location scouting out here. We're going to meet with our couple tomorrow evening to go over all the final spots and the final timeline. So again, communicating that to them ahead of time, that, yeah, we have a broad idea of what we're going to be doing, but we need to get there, we need to scope it out, and then we'll be presenting them with the final elopement day timeline and adventure basically the day before. And that's very common for us to do, especially if we haven't been to the place very, very recently. We just want to make sure that it goes smoothly and that we're not facing any hiccups that we could have avoided just having driven or hiked or whatever in the days before the elopement. So hopefully that was helpful. Honestly, the big things that I use ahead of time for researching, again, is AllTrails is a huge one. You can see people's photos. They often post about trail conditions. I've been following AllTrails leading up to this hike that we're going to do tomorrow. I know that there's some snow still up there, but it's still pretty accessible. So I'm hoping that our couple will be able to hike it in wedding attire. But if not, I have another idea for them that's still going to be stunning and amazing and so much fun.
Oh, and AllTrails recently seems like in the description they have like average hike times.
Yeah.
So that also is really good on the early side of like when you're starting to put together a timeline of like this hike is, most people take approximately 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can say, all right, knowing that we're in dresses or suits, hauling a bunch of gear. We may be that fast, we may be a little bit slower, and then like you're gonna add some buffer time, obviously, but it's a good base to start from your timeline as opposed to like knowing if you go on a hike like by yourself without gear, without a couple in their wedding attire, like you'll be much faster than what you're gonna be on wedding day. So knowing that ahead of time is really big for starting that initial timeline. And then obviously when you do your dry run or when you hike it to scout it, then you can kind of gauge like, oh yeah, the timing is accurate.
Yeah, totally. And then add in, whatever time you need for photos, ceremony, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's so helpful. All Trails is huge. Google Maps is just another really easy one. Google Earth is great as well because you can actually look at like when the sun sets behind mountains and stuff like that. So that one's cool for planning things out as far as lighting goes, because I do try to like plan my elopements in an order that will give me like the best lighting for each scenario. Like sunset, I want to end on the top of a mountain, whereas like the hours leading up to that would be great to do, I don't know, a slot canyon or to be in the woods or something where, you can kind of like buffer some of that really bright light.
Oh, another tool that we use is an app called Sunseeker, which is, I think right now it's like $9.99 on the App Store, but essentially like it allows you to use your phone or like the camera on your phone to like scout where the sun is going to be on a particular day at different time intervals. So like tomorrow for our elopement, we know we're going to do ceremony about at 8:00 a.m. And so I was able to go to the location, use this app, basically put my phone in the sky and like see like, okay, the sun is going to be so far above the mountain. It's going to be in this trajectory, which is just really good for lighting and like getting the best photos and videos on the day of and not having to be there at the exact time for the different events.
Yeah, I plan all of my elopements based on the lighting. I don't like harsh lighting, so I really try to put together my timelines in a way where I'm minimizing harsh lighting as much as possible. So the Sunseeker app is amazing. Just like yesterday when we went to the waterfalls, I was able to take out my Sunseeker app and see like, okay, if we're standing right here, like it's noon and the sun is directly ahead of us or on top of us and the lighting isn't great. But if we come back at like 4 or 5 o'clock, the sun's going to be behind this big mound of rocks and we're probably going to get really beautiful even lighting. So that's when I'm going to want to do the waterfall hike in the evening. So that's huge, especially for people like me that just really love even or backlit lighting, not harsh lighting. I use that all the time when I'm location scouting to understand where the sun is going to be, and it's so accurate, it's scary. So the main things that I want you to take away from this is the fact that, you don't have to have your elopement all planned to a T ahead of time, as long as you communicate with your couple. If it's a place you've never been to before, or a place you've never done like an all-day elopement at before, just say like, hey, I've done all these things at, but I have a process for planning this all out with you. And so I'm going to do the research ahead of time online. I'm going to use Google Earth, Google Maps, All Trails. I'm even going to ask maybe some of my photography buddies what they recommend. But then I'm going to show up early and I'm going to scout things out in person to come up with my final plan of attack. And my couples are almost always just so happy about that because then they don't have to worry about it. They just know that they're going to show up, and then the day of their elopement, we're going to take them on an adventure, and they don't have to worry about which waterfall they're going to or which lakeside spot they're doing the ceremony at, because we've gone through the process of finding the best spots for them. And the reason why we know it's the best spots for them is because we've had video consult calls with them probably twice at this point, and they filled out my questionnaire, which again is linked in the show notes for anybody who needs it. That's how we do location scouting.
Oh, one last little thing that we forgot to add was when we are going to a new spot, I feel like for every 10 roads we drive down or 10 trails we hike, most of them are busts. Like we hope that like there's gonna be an epic view, but more often than not, there isn't.
It's more time consuming than you'd think. Like even when we have the best plans to like concisely go to all these places, inevitably we're like, well, what's down that road and what's down that path? And can we get something even better that's farther away from people? And so a lot of times, I mean, we spend a lot of time looking at places and it's like, this is a no-go.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have high hopes and then
Yeah. And I think that's why photographers also get protective of their locations that they find, because it's like, man, I was out here for 3 straight days going over all the places. So no, I'm not just gonna tell you where this is because you DM'd me on Instagram. You know, like this is work that we do for our couples. And that's also why we oftentimes allocate a week of travel time, location scouting, shooting, sneak peeks, traveling back. I mean, we really spend a week on each one of our couples. And so that's why we charge a lot of money as well, because this is a lot of work, but it's very rewarding. And this is also why you're going to want to combine locations that you know like the back of your hand, like Zion and Colorado for us, you know, like places that I can very easily plan a full day elopement just because I know every nook and cranny. You want to combine places like that you know like the back of your hand with places that you don't know as well, because it's a lot of work photographing in places you don't know.
But it can also be super rewarding too, right? Because it's not the same place that you shot over and over again. So it allows you to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more spontaneous, and it's just it's a good variety.
Yeah, it's a good mix. So I really love shooting in the same places over and over again. I mean, I just get to know it so well, just like exactly where the sun sets in the fall versus the spring and all that kind of stuff. Like, I just feel like I get to know a place so well, but Todd gets bored. Todd wants more variety in his life. Yeah. So we're in Mount Shasta. We're doing this elopement the day after tomorrow. We came early to location scout, and yeah, nothing beats the boots on the ground understanding of where you are. So you're going to want to plan, a few days to do that, communicate with your couples, use my questionnaire, and things should really come together as you're communicating and understanding what your couples want. So thanks so much for joining us on this episode, specifically for elopement photographers. We have some really exciting things in the works for this podcast for elopement photographers. So keep an eye out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Stoked with Megan McPhail. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring content, check us out on Instagram at Stoked with Megan McPhail. And to learn more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you quit your 9-to-5, visit my website at meganmcphail.com. I hope this leaves you feeling stoked. See you next week.